All right. Well, thanks for joining today, everyone. Welcome to the Integrated Campaigns event with me. I'm your host, Brian Strauss. I'm co-founder of Demand Collective, along with Eric. Almost everyone here should know me. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about integrated campaigns. What are they? How do you make them happen, right? How demand gen is much more than just paid media. And I think everyone here on this call can empathize with the misconception that demand gen is just paid media, right? I think we've all heard that before. Like, what are you going to do for ads, right? So today we're going to talk more about what goes into that. First, we'll do a brief introduction. What are integrated campaigns? Waterfall content, deciding on your channels, key performance indicators, and then a Q&A afterwards where you can hit me with all your fun questions. So jumping right in, who am I? I'm Brian Strauss. I'm a demand gen marketer with a history of campaigns going 8 years back, right? I began running customer utilization and retention campaigns over the course of 8 years across primarily the enterprise function in terms of demand gen as a role, right? There is some other mixes in there, including SMB and mid-market across my previous roles at Paylease and Childcare CRM. But the most consistent one would be enterprise. So kind of jumping, my cat's on my desk right now, so bear with me. Jumping right in, what are integrated campaigns? Buddy, get down. So integrated campaigns are a multi-channel approach. Say hi. A multi-channel approach. Integrated campaigns are an omni-channel strategy aimed at utilizing multiple mediums for a variety of business objectives, right? So an integrated campaign is centered on providing a message across multiple channels. The goal is to get away from your random acts of marketing, right? You essentially want to have a cohesive narrative that's sort of overarching across all of these tactics and channels, right? And there's usually a big inclination from a lot of companies to basically be very reactive as opposed to proactive, right? And some examples of campaign objectives include brand awareness-driven initiatives, right? Content engagement, event attendance, and community engagement, really aimed at getting people to know your brand, right? Then you have your direct conversion campaign objectives, which probably one of the most popular, for better or worse, in our line of work, right? Including people trying to get demo requests, free trials, pay-as-you-go type motion. And then you have education-based campaign objectives, right? Where you're trying to basically push someone along the funnel in terms of being solution aware, problem aware, that sort of thing, right? So kind of diving in, adopt an integrated strategy to drive revenue. Why? Random acts of marketing. Probably one of the biggest silent killers of any marketing team's bandwidth, right? I think every marketer on this call, it resonates with them when you get the quick request from sales, right? Can we send out an email to 10 people? We want it hyper-personalized. I need a personalized white paper for this one prospect. The idea is to get away from these quick reactive initiatives, right? Now, they're a great example of a team's ability to pivot, but the problem is you lack that overarching narrative. And so over time, you lose out on any sort of like extrapolation of the benefits of an integrated campaign. You lose out on the brand awareness being associated with particular value propositions. You lose out on exponential gains in both performance and brand familiarity bias, right? All of these things you miss out on if you're not telling a cohesive story across all of these channels. And so the goal is to get away from random acts of marketing and to truly adopt an integrated strategy. Integrated in terms of both messaging and in terms of what your output is as a team. So let's take a look at a few components of a campaign, right? This shouldn't be rocket science for a lot of people here, right? This is the sort of stuff you hear a lot about, but let's address it anyways. You've got your demand capture pillar, your demand creation pillar, and your marketing ops pillar. Demand capture, right? You're utilizing channels meant to harvest existing demand. And these are the sorts of channels where you're not creating that brand familiarity. You're not increasing that brand familiarity bias. It's really meant to engage the people who are already, more often than not, in a purchasing motion. And so this is where you have things like Google ads, right? Outbound emails, LinkedIn conversation ads, certain types of events, all that fun stuff, right? And a big misconception a lot of early stage companies make is assuming, sorry if you hear my cat, is assuming that Google Ads is a demand creation channel, right? And I use the term demand creation loosely because there is, in my opinion, a big misconception that marketing and demand generation actually creates demand as opposed to facilitating that, going back to that level of awareness, right? Teaching and educating a marketplace, one, if they don't even realize they have a problem, teaching them about the problem, right? Then teaching them, hey, this is the type of solution you would utilize to solve for that problem. And then see, right, why we're the best solution for that problem. And so kind of looking at the demand creation channels, you can see paid social content distribution, communities. In the case of, some companies who put out their own communities, we all know there's an ulterior motive there. And then workshops centered on ICP problem solving. And then that third pillar, right? Marketing ops. Every compelling campaign is backed by data, and it's backed by a firm framework of measurable results. That being said, not everything is measurable, and that's fine. There's other things you rely on in terms of like correlation in reporting, right? Or qualitative insights like hybrid attribution. All of these things used in tandem form a complete picture of your campaign. And so it's not a matter of, hey, you should only be doing how did you hear about us on a form fill, right? Or only doing software attribution. It's about forming that full picture across your integrated strategy. So prioritizing buyer intent to inform your strategy, right? First, you have to ask yourself, is this campaign going to be centered on the demand capture or on the demand creation? And usually I recommend you have components of both, right? So take, for example, usually what I like to do is if I'm working with a company that can service SMB, mid-market, and enterprise level companies, right? Those enterprise solutions and those enterprise deals often take, in terms of sales cycles, anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, depending on your product, depending on implementation, depending on how long legal takes, and if there's a pilot program involved. So usually I like to do a blend of short-term demand capture, sort of your quick wins, especially if it's a first 90 days type thing in your new role, versus long-term demand creation. And what that does is it helps to, one, quick wins, like I mentioned, right? You're able to capture immediate pipeline. You're able to kind of give a proof of concept on certain go-to-market motions. Meanwhile, you're also able to keep the lights on, right? Because if marketing goes 2 quarters without any pipeline, I can guarantee someone's getting fired. But short-term strategies are not the path to long-term exponential growth, right? You fail to get the hockey stack if you're only thinking in the short term. Because one, you have performance plateaus. You run out of all known existing demand, right? And even given how finite and limited that existing demand is, on top of that, you usually have competitors you're fighting against, right? And you're also battling against churn, right? And so now you're really just fighting to stay afloat if you're only utilizing those short-term demand capture strategies. And that's where the long-term demand creation play comes. But as a demand marketer, it is imperative that you take the time to, one, create that narrative internally, right? Talking about internal marketing, and really get the buy-in from an executive level, right? You have to have this cross-functionally accepted and adopted for it to work. So looking at defining your audience, right? Demographic versus behavioral. These are some of the data points you might look at when defining your ICP. Usually break it down into 2 categories, right? Demographic versus behavioral. Who are they and what do they do, right? So Examples on the demographic side or firmographic, people refer to it that way as well. Examples include industry, company name, number of employees, yearly revenue, company qualifiers specific to your industry. So for example, when I worked at Childcare CRM, we had a minimum amount of childcare centers that a company had to operate with for us to be able to work with them, right? Same thing at Paylease, except in that particular instance, we worked with property management companies, and they had to have a specific amount of units for us to work with them, right? Otherwise, we sent them to a partner who worked more in the SMB space. So it's important, one, to have this be crystal clear, right? And FYI, Eric, I can't see the chat, so if any questions pop in, feel free to let me know. So this stuff is super important in terms of, one, how you plan for the campaign, two, how you're going to measure success and how you establish your SLA with sales, right? Because if sales comes back to you and they say, hey, we're getting junk leads, right? But the qualification criteria is something you both mutually agreed to, and it's already been a sales accepted lead. If it's becoming disqualified that far down the funnel, then it tells you at the top of the funnel, it's not the issue, right? It tells you, one, also there's an accountability factor there, where if a team has already accepted it and it's mutually agreed upon criteria, then there's really no excuse for it to either A, get that far in the process, or B, the other team needs to take accountability for accepting it. And then the other side of that is behavioral, right? This is basically where you have some measure of intent. I'm not going to go super in depth on intent data here, but because I think a lot of intent providers have, pulling from the same pool, and it's not first party data. So I think you need to be cognizant of that when choosing an intent data provider. But going through the behavioral components, you need to look at that as like, right, that's an opportunity to go, cool, is this person engaging with us, engaging with our content? And that takes a couple different forms, right? Pricing, page visits, email click-throughs, content downloads. And some of these by themselves don't mean a whole lot. But when you put them all together, it paints a picture of someone, how they explore and learn about your brand, which more often than not is not the linear fashion that we like to map our campaigns to. And for the sake of, digestibility, I've mapped some of our later slides to that, but truly, I think everyone here can relate to buyers don't buy the way we like to map them to. And so keeping that in mind when looking at this data, it should be used as like just a broad level data set, right? It shouldn't be used as, okay, these people are immediately ready to shoot over to sales. We are going for hand raisers. Far and away, explicit declared intent is the way to go. So waterfall content, a repeatable framework for scaling content production and distribution. Emphasizing content consumption to drive revenue. How? It's a huge lift to consistently build flagship content pieces. Most teams will spend a year putting together one ultimate guide to such and such. Maybe they'll spend the other half of the year putting together one big event, right? And then that's it. A lot of these campaigns die in the vine, right? A lot of these content pieces get put out. They're not looked at again until the next year when a new version comes out, right? So the strategy here is to say we have a top level flagship content piece, right? And we're going to extend the mileage on that piece, right? You spend 6 months putting together a super data comprehensive report. It's important that you find the key themes that are valuable to your prospects within that flagship piece, and make sure that you're pulling out all those themes into derivative content pieces that can be consistently distributed across all channels that you decide to work with, right? So here's for an example that I might use. I just use demand gen marketers, right, as the ICP here as an example of if Demand Collective were to run a simple flagship campaign, right? We might start with a flagship demand gen integrated campaigns pillar page, right? And that might be a pillar page that becomes sort of your home base for all things integrated campaigns. And on the left here, you can see the ecosystem of demand gen pillar pages that would come from that, right? So we'd be able to look at that pillar page and say, cool, here are 4 key themes that we kind of touch on within that flagship piece. And you can see number 1, paid media strategy, followed by pipeline analysis, product go-to-market launch, cross-functional collaboration, right? And those sort of become your 4 key themes that you're pulling out from the integrated campaigns pillar page. Now, each of those is in itself its own mini little ecosystem, right? Because now what you're going to do is you're going to take each of those 4 themes and you're going to produce templates supporting each of the core ideas within each of those landing pages. You're going to produce paid social copy, paid social images, display, right? You're going to create emails that are centered on the themes and topics within each of those themes. And that becomes this expansive overarching narrative, right? That all boils back to one flagship piece, integrated campaigns as a concept, right? But that specificity within the broader narrative allows you to dial in much more explicitly what topics are interesting to your ICP without over-indexing on any one particular topic. You know what they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? The other component here on the right, you can see is a target account pillar page, right? And so what this then becomes is you've built out all of the infrastructure, right? And the idea here is that you don't take up all the bandwidth of your content team when putting together these integrated campaigns. The idea is that they already have fuel for the fire, that they're already able to say, cool, we did the integrated campaigns pillar page. We can recreate that in 4 different variations for these particular themes, right? Same thing with all of the derivative content pieces. They should all be easily reproducible, but more relevant to the specific topic at hand. From there, you've operationalized it, right? And you've templatized components of that process, taking that then into a target account motion where you're able to say, cool, we're going to take this integrated campaigns pillar page and we're going to turn that into how would we help demand gen marketers at a cybersecurity company, right? And now, even though you have something that's already very niche and targeted in terms of its topic, its taxonomy, and vernacular used, it suddenly becomes now more specific to that particular industry, but with a much quicker turnaround than if you were trying to do all of this from scratch repeatedly, right? Starting from something is always easier than starting from nothing. So kind of digging into what channels, right? Distribution is the catalyst of every campaign, right? So if a white paper is released and no one reads it, was it really released? I don't know how many of you have ever put a post out on LinkedIn and it was a dud, right? I think Dave Gerhardt just made a post on this where he said, if it flops, try it again, right? And so the concept here is not to have flops, but to make things, the concept here is basically to make sure people are actually consuming the content you're investing all of these resources in. And so distribution is the key facet for a successful campaign, right? We've already looked at like what goes into an audience. Then you have to decide, cool, where is that audience going to be? And by then, at this point, ideally, you've already had the research, right? You already have the fundamentals of where your ICP likes to hang out, right? And that may be communities, it may be specific subreddits, right? That's all sort of a mission you should be doing with your product marketer if you have that luxury. If you don't, then I recommend you talk to existing customers. If you don't have existing customers, then you need to get out there and do some customer research and just nose to the grindstone. That's kind of what me and Eric did before we started Demand Collective. We talked to 1 million demand marketers and we said, what would you be looking to get out of a community, right? So establish your points of conversion, right? You have to know, where do people enter the funnel? Where is pipeline created? And then you need to think about the channels that lead to these conversion points and you have to optimize for them, right? We're moving backwards. We're looking at basically all of the conversion points and going, 1, which ones are driving the most pipeline? And of those that are driving pipeline, which ones are closing at the highest clip? for the most amount of money, right? And so just kind of looking at some of these demo requests, contact us, gated content, paid social lead ad forms, making sure all of this is one, documented for transparency across your teams, both internally and cross-functionally, right? Like there should never be a form where they request to see your product and there's no one there to pick it up, right? Making sure the operational components of your campaign are in place, hugely important, because there's nothing worse than wasting that declared intent, right? People who want to buy your product should be able to buy your product, and they should be able to do it easily. So looking at using data to identify your channels, right? And just an FYI, you don't have to take notes. We'll send this stuff in the slides afterwards. But using data to identify your channels, unless you're Coca-Cola, you've probably got bandwidth and budget limitations, right? I think every one of us knows that, we never get the budget we want. And we're always asked to do more with less, right? That's a common thing we constantly hear. And so your sources of truth going into this, when you have to really make those educated cuts, go to your CRM, go to your marketing automation platform, right? And hopefully you're not using Eloqua. But Salesforce or HubSpot as a CRM, Marketo or HubSpot as an automation platform, right? And this is where you're going to dig in to find what channels work for you, right? So Salesforce, for example, has the campaigns and the campaign member objects. And from there, you have different campaign types in the campaign object, right? And you can map those. They can either be a one-to-one to conversion points. They can be a one-to-one to campaign types that you want to run. As long as you have clear lines of sight and documentation that align with those campaign types, you're able to build out reports that basically connect to all contacts that are associated with those campaigns, and then all contacts that are associated with deals, right? So you're able to see the overlap of what channels are driving what deals, because that's the key thing here, right? You may have, for example, Google generating 50% of all your pipeline, right? But it turns out only 5% of those deals are closing. Not great. And it turns out they're at a lower volume. Also not great. So being mindful of not just the amount of pipeline being created, but looking down funnel, right? How much of it is dropping off? How much of it becomes closed won? How much of it stays a customer for longer than a year, long enough to have a reasonable CAC payback time? So kind of looking here on the right, like this kind of just breaks down that approach, right? Making sure you're taking a data-driven approach to how you find the pipeline that's going to be most valuable to your company. And then you plan your campaigns around that. So looking at tactics here, and this is just a top level overview of those tactics, right? And so you can see here, I talked a little bit earlier about, the buyer stage, right? Awareness versus consideration versus purchase. This is purely for ease of digestibility, right? Like if you go to present a plan, you have to be able to coincide it with where buyers are at in their purchasing journey. But the reality is that most buyers do not buy in a linear fashion. So they wouldn't necessarily consume these in the particular order we map them out to be. And that's fine. You just have to be prepared to that, and you have to be prepared to speak to that. You can see here each of them with their own specific goals, specific destinations. And the key thing here is that they're mapped to different conversion points, right? So there is, this is where you can connect those channels back to that campaign report I talked about a little bit earlier, where you're able to dive in and say, cool, we know that our G2 campaign, right, is connected to the majority of our closed won business. You can make a few assumptions there based on customer research, especially if you talk to them. You may learn, hey, that what played a big role was the social proof, right? They went and they saw you had great reviews, you had existing customers that were still with you. And that's also where they're going to see things like the relevant taxonomy that speaks to the problems in the way they would talk about them. Because we as marketers, we tend to make a lot of assumptions about what buyers want, about how they talk about those problems, about how they perceive them. And there's no clearer way to educate yourself on the way your prospects would approach them than going to those sort of third-party UGC type sites, right? That's just one example. But the idea here is tying those conversion points back to the channels and making educated cuts or gains in your budgets and allocations to ensure you're making the most effective decisions in terms of spend and results. Because I think we've all had the conversations with CFOs where they say, I want to put $5 in and I want to get $100 out, right? And sometimes, we have to have the hard discussions and say that the ROI is not always tied directly to the channel, but we do have to tie it to business results overall. So a few additional inputs, right? Looking at events, partner marketing, referral programs, and website optimizations, right? Website optimizations in particular, I think going back to the concept of the leaky funnel, I talked about it a little bit earlier, where if you have declared intent and you lose that, that's a big deal, right? And I guarantee if you have to have that conversation with your CEO, it's not going to be a good one. And so this is where reducing friction, making it easy to buy, things like self-scheduling tools, very, very quick speed to lead, something like after 5 minutes, you lose like 30 or 40% of your likelihood to win the deal. Insane, right? And so these are just some other key additional inputs that can go into your integrated campaign, but that may not necessarily be either A, depending on the scope of your team, entirely in your wheelhouse, or B, may just sort of be some extracurriculars, right? In particular, partner marketing, right? If you have a partner marketer, luxury. Developing your backlink strategy, also could tie to partnerships, all that fun stuff, as well as making sure you're in lockstep with sales around their outbound strategy, right? Is sales also speaking the same language, preaching the same messaging that you're using across your campaigns, right? Everything should be an echo chamber of the value props that your company is helping to solve for. So KPIs and debrief, right? So let's just first, your core, the way I like to approach KPIs is I usually break it down into 2 ways, right? First, what you see here are your core KPIs at the business level, right? These are the KPIs that your CRO or your CMO or your CEO, they're all going to care about this stuff. They want to know, how is it impacting the company? How are we reaching our EBITDA goals? How are we reaching our revenue goals, right? Pipeline sourced, sales qualified opportunities, right? Your closed won bookings and your pipeline velocity. Sales qualified opportunities to me is a much better indicator than leads, because it goes back to that concept I mentioned of mutual accountability, right? It means this was valid enough that you're not just stuffing the top of the funnel with junk leads to meet a lead goal. These are qualified opportunities your sales team is actively working and have agreed are qualified, right? So then there's that accountability and its validity and credibility of your work, right? Sales can't turn around and say you're sending them junk if they've qualified it, right? Closed won bookings, right? Every CEO, how much money are we bringing in this quarter? And then pipeline velocity, right? If you have the same amount of pipeline coming in, but you're able to close it more quickly, that's going to be a big deal, right? And that's going to have long-term implications for the business's growth. The other side of things is, there's channel metrics as well, right? And I don't have that included here, but channel metrics specific to, take email, for example. You might have open rates, click-throughs, right? Those are the sorts of things that your C-suite probably isn't going to care about. And if they do, you may have bigger problems. But as a marketer, you're always trying to be cognizant of those channels, right? You're always trying to think through, how well does the newsletter do? How well does our weekly workshop do? How well does our paid ads program do, right? All of these things play into that. And those are all metrics and KPIs you as a marketer individually have to be cognizant of, especially when making decisions around when to cut a program. And then just some additional KPIs, right? Part of your funnel analysis. So time in each stage, right? This is a good opportunity for you to see Where in the buying cycle are people falling off? Time to close by op source, going back to pipeline velocity, but this is purely from an age perspective. How old are your deals before they're closed won, as opposed to the amount of revenue moving through each of those stages at a given time? And then percentage of close loss by stage, right? Percentage of close loss by source. That's an important one, right? Because it's important to identify, even if you're generating $1 million in pipeline, if you're only closing 10% of it, or if it's on an extremely low margin product and you may not be reaching the company's goals, revenue goals, or profitability, if you continue to invest in that channel, even if it's seemingly doing really well. So thanks for listening. Feel free to jump in with any questions. I am your guy. Let's see. Feel free to drop them in the chat or just unmute. Okay. All right. We've got a chatty bunch today. How we doing? Oh, I see. Hey, what up? Hey, Carl.
What's up, guys?
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys. That was great. I think we run a lot of those tactics in my day job, but we're high volume, low price, so the decision isn't really tough to make. So we find that with our software, the majority of people have one or two touch points.
Mhm.
And then we run into the issue of people discovering us on mobile and doing all their research there, but then they come back on desktop and sign up. So our direct traffic is disproportionate to what you'd see in like a typical website.
Mhm.
But something that I'd add in there and see if anyone else does this well, because we feel like we do it well, because anecdotally our SDRs and BDRs tell us that this is making a big difference. But we try to use voice of customer as much as possible in our messaging.
Mhm.
And that comes down to gathering reviews. If someone leaves a 5-star review, we ask them to leave a video testimonial. We incentivize it with $50 Amazon gift card. And then we have all of these plastered all over the website. And instead of like letting ourselves as the company tell you that we're the best, we let our customers do that. And because no one really wants to hear someone say they're the best, right? It doesn't make any sense. But we found that to work a lot, and our engagement metrics on our website have gone up. And yeah, I guess on sales calls, everyone says, yeah, it's really just the reviews that brought me in here. Like I was interested with all the collateral, but when I heard how well the product is doing and the value that it's bringing to other people that are within my industry, I I had to hop on the free trial. So I wanted to add that in there because I think that's important tidbit.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I think that was definitely a reason why I called out G2 as a channel in particular. I know in the past I worked with Capterra, which I don't think a lot of people realize that if you are a paid advertiser in Capterra, they provide you, and maybe this has changed, this is back in 2020, they had a free incentive program where they would be the ones to send a gift card to people if you encourage them to leave a review on their site of your product. Which is when you have a budget of like $6, which a lot of us do, right? That is a really enticing offer. And it also becomes, like for example, I didn't have a product marketer at the time, so messaging was a luxury. And intensive product marketing research also a luxury. So we basically, it's a good opportunity to say when you're coming up with your campaigns, here's how people talk about it, right? And here's the words they would use, especially if it's a tech apprehensive audience like we were working with at the time. That was a great call out, Carl. Thank you.
Hey, you guys, it's Matt.
Hey,
Um,
Matt.
what's going on? Yeah, just to add to that, Carl's a really good point. I was in a similar boat with the previous company, and going from 0 to 1 to get those reviews, what we did was we provided our customers with just a quick survey of like 3 questions, and really it was like, how much do you like us? And those that gave a 9 or 10, we give them like similar to what you said, Carl, a $50 gift card for a review. And then it really helped our product team too, because anybody who was below a 6, we're like, oh, something's up, and it would actually lead to a call with the product team to figure out what's going wrong. So it was like double whammy customer service plus, good reviews. And then if they came back and left a good review, we would give them another $50 to leave one publicly with Capterra. So it was like incentive to take the survey and then incentive to review us. At first, we wanted to get those badges because we all had badge addiction at the time, but it did help with like messaging, and it really helped with a lot of in a lot of other aspects. So, agreed.
I'm curious, where does this group stand on the ethicality of incentives, right? So I saw a pretty spirited discussion on LinkedIn where people were basically calling out this, I don't want to call him an influencer because he is like an actual doer and he's a really cool guy, but he basically said, here was my play. I incentivized people to leave reviews, and people were like, you're bribing them to leave reviews. And so I was surprised because I thought it was a pretty common ethical tactic. And I assume, since it sounds like we've all done it, I'm guessing we're all on the same page, but any thoughts there? Carl or Matt?
I was gonna let someone else who hasn't chime in, but if no one has anything to add, it's very much overdone now. I think people are so used to it in the market of getting incentives that they don't really think twice about it. Maybe before, like some of our customers are like, whoa, 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 why are you sending me a gift card? Like, and like, what? Let us explain. First of all, we asked you to leave a G2 review, and it's their platform and they can kind of do whatever they want. I think, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, you're referring to Google. And yes, like Google doesn't want you to incentivize it. In fact, it's against their rules. And if I don't know if you can easily get caught doing it, but there's probably some sort of repercussions for that. But I think people are used to it. So I think the ethical question is kind of out the door at this point. I get offered Beats headphones to take sales calls all the time now, or some sort of incentive.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine. And I think if you're not doing it, you could be missing out. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree, Carl. And I think it's almost a question of beyond whether if it's ethical or not, it's almost hard to get attention. So I think you might want to get signals that people are interested to like make that step, because people are bombarded with messages and free gifts, like, and all kinds of stuff. And it might be a turnoff, but if there is somebody that shows interest, again, that's why we kind of did it in a stepwise fashion. It really helped out.
It helps cut through the noise. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree, for what it's worth. 2 things to add. One, for getting reviews and just positive feedback, if you sometimes have trouble getting legal approval for like legal or approved case studies from clients, Kelly, who's one of our members, had a really interesting take where he runs a podcast and he's been seeing it work really well. And we were talking about the benefits, and one of the benefits that he wasn't expecting when they started was that you can get these really high level executives to share like positive feedback on your company in the podcast that you can then use in marketing without having to go around the normal like legal approval process, which I thought was kind of a little bit of a hack and super interesting. So just a nugget there. I had a question, Brian, and for everyone else, how do you go about like planning what campaigns you're going to run over the course of whatever timeline, whether it's a quarter or a half or a year? And how do you determine like what the right amount is based on your resources, right? Whether that's, you obviously don't want to do too many campaigns and you also don't want to do too little. I'm just curious, like how you go around, that planning process.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta budget, right? Budget and bandwidth, 2 biggest things. And always expect whatever budget you propose is going to get chopped in half, and they're going to tell you to go figure it out with, nothing but sticks and rocks. But normally what you have to do is you have to look at what your goals are and you have to back up into them, right? So for example, if they say, and I'm doing this for the sake of easy math, right? They say, we want you to bring in 500K in pipeline this quarter, right? And historically you've invested, let's say 30 grand in a particular channel, right? And you look at the performance metrics against it. You knew off of 30 grand, you brought in, only 100 leads, right? And out of those 100 leads, only 20 of them turned into pipeline. And the pipeline is not enough to sustain even 10% of your 500K goal, right? That's where you can have a conversation that says, hey, one, looking at the numbers, historical performance, looking at available budget, looking at what you guys expect, that's not going to align. And so from there, you have to, one, more heavily index organic channels, strategies, and partnership, low cost options, right? That's where that a full-on paid media strategy isn't going to be your play, right? As much as we want to preach and say content distribution through paid channels is great, and it is the way, I think, when you have the money, it's also a luxury that a lot of marketers don't have. So you have to be prepared to say, cool, like we're going to get there through a breakdown of, 5, 10, 15 through each of these channels that are going to help get us to that final 500K goal, right? And just kind of figuring out where the budget allocates into each of those channels.
And do most of you guys do just like you plan once at the beginning of the year, you plan out your campaigns and you just stick to that through the rest of your year? It's just open to the group. I'm curious how everyone approaches campaign planning.
Anyone want to jump in?
For us, it's fluid. It kind of depends on how the quarter is going. And I'm in a unique situation where we're kind of an umbrella company and we have 3 brands and 3 different products that we sell. So marketing is one of the only departments that works on all 3 products. Every product has its own sales team, own partnerships, own CS support. But we kind of look at closely at our LTV to CAC if we just kind of separate marketing on its own. But obviously marketing influences deals that came from partnerships or from external channels and that sort of thing, because there's collateral that everybody uses. So we also look at blended, and if things are looking pretty good, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, then I approach, the decision makers and the people that have the wallets at the company, and I say, hey, listen, I've identified some new channels I want to try. Let's experiment a bit. We're highly efficient. And if the sales team is kind of dry on leads or their calendars aren't booked up, then you're not supposed to be spending money on sales. You should be spending money on marketing to drive the go-to-market engine. So it's kind of fluid. It kind of depends on needs. And if, we're not hitting our targets or forecasts that we forecasted in the beginning of the year, or rather like November or December, if we're lazy, then yeah, it kind of depends. And then we kind of shift focus on different products and brands, depending on where the need is.
That's how we do it too. We have like basically 2 big pillar events, or like the big campaigns, and then it's like mostly more just like evergreen advertising, I guess. But I'm always curious if that's less efficient than doing smaller targeted campaigns. But when you're being fluid, you don't have as much time to like plan out concentrated multi-channel campaigns. So that's always been like a trade-off that I'm not sure if we're doing right. I don't know if anyone, or you, Carl, do you guys think about that trade-off too?
Yeah, like
and like when you decide to allocate more budget, are you running like a spiky campaign, or are you just allocating more budget to the normal evergreen?
No, we're kind of trying something different. So we have our evergreen kind of bread and butter where we know it'll kind of do its thing. And then when we try new things, yeah, it's kind of like a 3-month commitment, and we kind of kill it quickly if it's not working type thing. And we try to leave time to be able to have time in the day and in our quarters to be able to fill in like for experimentation and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, depending too on your sales cycle, you have to have your early indicators saying, like, if it's something that's not going to generate pipeline right away, even if it's only a quarter-long experiment, you have to at least have the signals that tell you it may later on, right? Like, I always try and align my stuff in the way that product will, right? We've got a roadmap that says, hey, here are the evergreens going, always on. You've got your short-term engagements that sometimes can be as short as 1 quarter, or even go into the next quarter, right? You got to have like varying diversity of campaign lengths, right? And the level of bandwidth and involvement that goes into them, at least in my opinion. Oh, sorry, I'm like fighting for my life over here. My voice is so hoarse. Cool. Any other questions while we're all here? Okie doke, people. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time today. Before we go, though, I do want to highlight one more thing. Let's go ahead and go back over here. We are having our inaugural, where is it? Get out of the way, Zoom bar. The Catalina Demand Mixer. So everyone, June 21st coming up, a classic demand gen mixer. We're doing breakout rooms, basically giving people the opportunity to connect in a way that's beyond just having someone talk at you for an hour like I just did. No, I'm kidding. But going more than when you go to like, you know, your annual demand gen events where it's, you know, a bunch of sales pitches or someone just talking at you and you've kind of got it running in the background. This is about connecting people face to face. It's always been kind of one of the core tenets and missions of Demand Collective. And so we're opening this up to the broader public as well to get people engaged and to really put some faces to the names. So feel free to register. We hope to see you guys there. I'm going to drop the link right now in the chat.
We're curating the breakout rooms by what problems you're trying to solve right now. So in the application form, you'll see a question around what you're struggling with. So the more context you can add there, the better job we can do of matching you with the right group. So should be fun. Share on LinkedIn, share with your friends, and we'll see you all there.
Thanks, everyone.